This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver. Today we talk with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, about the state Supreme Court race. Welcome, J.R. I have a quiz for you. Name one important position up for election this April.
Well, there are several. State Supreme Court Justice, State Superintendent. There are several judicial races that are uncontested, so there aren't going to be really any contest there, but also Circuit Court, local offices, so there are a number of them. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of attention being paid to the election other than State Supreme Court and State Superintendent.
Right, okay. Well, I suppose we can get into a lot of those other races in southeastern Wisconsin going forward, but for today we're going to focus on the Supreme Court Justice race. Essentially, the state Supreme Court is comprised of 7 justices. They're elected to 10-year terms. The elections are statewide and technically nonpartisan, and it's happening this April. For the second time in a row, a seat is up for grabs that will either maintain or tip the partisan balance of those 7 justices. Tell us what's at stake, JR.
Ideological control of the state Supreme Court and the direction that court's going to take for at least the next year. Now, for conservatives, it's more serious than that. If you take the long-term view of the court, this is their last chance to flip the majority for a couple of years. In 2026, conservative Rebecca Bradley seat would be up. In 2027, conservative Annette Ziegler would be up. And then 2028, liberal Rebecca Dallett. So if conservatives don't win this race this year, they'd have to maintain 2 seats in back-to-back years just to have a shot in 2028 of flipping the court. And that's a tough task. So for them, this is really, really important. For liberals, it's important to maintain the majority, but they also have 2 more shots coming the next 2 years. They could flip it again, which would mean, yet again, a flood of spending in Supreme Court races in Wisconsin if that were to come to happen.
And getting into a little bit about why these 2 sides kind of want control of the court. Before the democratically backed candidate Janet Protasewicz was elected in 2023, that election tipped the balance to liberals. But before that, conservatives controlled the Wisconsin Supreme Court for 14 years. There were decisions that limited unions, affirmed a voter ID law, expanded gun rights, curbed the powers of the Democratic governor, banned absentee ballot drop boxes, and established political districts that ensured Republican dominance in the state legislature. How were the past 2 years, JR, different from that?
Oh, just 2 things that you mentioned that have flipped. So now drop boxes are again legal in Wisconsin. The Supreme Court last summer ruled that those were allowed. And then 2, they threw out the maps that had been in place previously, and that resulted in Republican lawmakers basically embracing the maps that Tony Evers drew for the Assembly and the Senate because they were fearful of what the court might draw. And when Democrats picked up 14 seats, 10 in the Assembly and 4 in the Senate last fall, it's changed the dynamic of the legislature dramatically. Those are just 2 things. We also have abortion cases for the court, powers of the governor, powers of the attorney general. I mean, the list goes on and on. We are in a very litigious capital right now. Basically, everything that happens ends up in court somehow or another because the governor is a Democrat, Republicans control the legislature, and they are at odds about all kinds of stuff. And so we've seen decisions like whether the legislature has final review of stewardship purchases. That was something the court took up this past summer. I mean, the court is hugely powerful and influential in how things operate in Wisconsin, and whoever wins, you don't want to just kind of say, well, if conservatives win, they'll always side with Republicans, and if the liberal wins, they'll always side with Democrats. But it's kind of how it happens in Wisconsin right now.
You're tuned into Capital Notes. I'm WEWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Okay, so J.R., what do we know so far about the 2 candidates, GOP-backed judge and former Wisconsin Attorney General Brad Schimmel and Democratically backed Judge Susan Crawford?
Well, if you watch the TV ads, they're not very nice judges, I guess. I've started to be flippant about that, but that's what these races have become, right? If you are the opposition, you find any sentence they gave that was not the maximum, that involved a very not nice person, and you harp on that. Schimmel and his allies are hitting Crawford on sentences for child sex predators, those kinds of things. Crawford hitting Schimmel about sentences handed out to domestic abusers. We've all seen abortion be an issue in this case. That has been a dominant theme in the ads that Crawford and her allies have run against Schimmel. So it's really, the airways have really lit up already in this race in a unique way because, 2 years ago, we had a four-way primary in February that narrowed the field to two. So it started a little slower. This one, it became a full-blown general election in January, and any veneer of this being nonpartisan race was stripped away right away. I mean, Schimmel, obviously, former Republican elected official statewide. Crawford got $1 million, state Democratic Party, in December. The last reports we saw, she got another $2 million from the Democratic Party. Schimmel, $1.675 million from the Republican Party. You look to the people who are giving money to them or to the state parties that are funneling funds to the candidates. They're big-time GOP and Dem donors. This is a nationalized race because there are huge implications here. We are a swing state. We are one of the swingiest of the swing states often. And things really kind of come down to Wisconsin at times. And there are huge stakes of who will set the rules and how elections are run in Wisconsin. And lately it's been the Supreme Court.
Both campaigns in their ads are trying to highlight the other's quote unquote record of failures to keep Wisconsin safe. This is even though a vast majority of criminal cases do not reach the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and sentencing is something that happens at the trial court level. How does that play into how voters actually get mobilized, and what do you think they really need to know about what Supreme Court justices do?
Oh, it's part of the record, so it's fair game. And people will tell you that this resonates with people. If they see that somebody has bad judgment in their opinion, they will keep that in mind when it comes to the Supreme Court. So the court typically handles, big judicial theoretical cases, right? The big philosophies, how the law should be applied, not handing out sentences. But, people will tell you that these are part of their judgments, a record of how they handle things. And it plays in how voters view these judges. Granted, most voters aren't in tune with how the Supreme Court actually operates, but it's all part of the record that helps shape their view of these candidates.
You mentioned the nationalized nature of this election. Of course, 2023 really was, with the election of Janet Protasiewicz running against Daniel Kelly, conservative. What are you watching at this point in the campaign, about 6 weeks for the election? Elon Musk has reportedly spent at least $1.5 million on commercials supporting Schimmel. What does the national interest in the race look like?
Oh, there's a lot. Musk has got 1.6 million in ads from what I've checked with Ad Impact. His group's put another $1 million into canvassing, which is get out the vote efforts. We've seen George Soros give $1 million to the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. I mean, the list goes on and on of the people who have gotten involved nationally. And for Schimmel, that's a key thing in this race. 2 years ago, Daniel Kelly, the conservative, he declined to take direct transfers from the Republican Party. Remember, in Wisconsin, state law allows donors to make unlimited contributions to political parties, which can then make uncapped contributions to candidates. So 2 years ago, Janet Protasiewicz got about roughly $10 million from the Democratic Party. Huge, huge help for her. Daniel Kelly declined to take transfers from the Republican Party, which still kind of baffles some people. Schimmel's not going to make that mistake. He has been unabashed saying he needs help, that he's looking for national groups to get in. He wants to make sure the playing field is level when it comes to the finances. And right now, actually, is tilted heavily in his favor. Looking at Ad Impact, which tracks ad buys and independent expenditure reports, it was about 2-1 in overall spending, both what's happened and reserved in Schimmel's favor through the election. Now, that's a point in time late last week. Those things are updated daily, if not hourly sometimes, so that could shift. But there's been a huge influx of a conservative cash in this race. The question is, will Democrats match that or exceed it, and how are they going to spend the money going forward?
And let's talk about the abortion issue in particular. So that's the case about the 1849 law that a trial court judge ruled does not apply to abortions, but in fact outlaws feticide, which would be killing a pregnant person's baby without their consent. The trial court decision was appealed to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court has heard oral arguments. There's another case with Planned Parenthood. What are you watching for in that case and as it intersects with this election?
I don't know that people are expecting anything to come down before the election. Kind of what I'm watching is, how does abortion play this spring as an issue, period? And, go back to last fall, and Democrats used abortion quite a bit in their campaign ads. it wasn't as effective as it had been in 2022 and the 2023 state Supreme Court race. Part of that was because voters were more concerned about the economy. That was the number one driving issue. You don't really have as much of an economic factor, though, in a judicial race. So what I'm wondering is, what's going to turn this race for voters? Is it the sentences that Crawford and Schimmel have handed out while they've been on the court? Is it abortion? Is it something else? What's going to drive this race? What's going to be the issue that drives voters to the polls come April 1st?
And when we think about what's politically mobilizing for people in Wisconsin, I mean, we can't take it out of the context of the fact that there was the 2022 midterms, there was the 2023 state Supreme Court race, which was a big election in the state. We just had the 2024 election cycle. How is election fatigue playing into what you're seeing in terms of mobilizing voters this year?
Good question. Although turnout in the primary last week was about 9-10%, which actually was higher than in 2021. So I've marveled for years at Wisconsin voters. We've been the eye of the storm, it seems like, constantly for years and years, and they always answer the bell. When there's an election, they turn out. So my question is, at some point, are they going to say, I've had enough? It doesn't seem like it's going to be anytime soon. But, for Schimmel, he's trying to expand the electorate. When I started doing this 25 years ago, spring elections really tilted toward Republicans. It was an older, whiter, more conservative electorate turning out than compared to November. Well, things have shifted between the two parties. Now, the more reliable voters are the ones who turn out the most are Democrats. They're the more college educated, a little bit more suburban. All right, the rural blue collar voter is not as frequent, does turn out as frequently in low turnout elections. That's now the Trump voter. So for Schimmel, he wants to expand this electorate to make it look more like November of 24 and get more of Trump supporters out. The question is, how do you do that? Musk Group is trying to turn out voters right now as we speak. The state GOP is, Americans for Prosperity. They're making an effort, but we have not seen evidence yet that the Trump voter will turn out when Trump's not on the ballot. It just doesn't really happen as much. So that is definitely a challenge for Schimmel. For Crawford, she wants to recreate the coalition that Janet Prosewicz had. Get those suburban women who are concerned about abortion out. Get college kids out who are concerned about that issue. It's going to be fascinating to see what the electorate looks like come April 1st and what drives them to the polls.
All right. Well, thanks for the information and perspective on the court, JR, and thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
That was JR Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on Lake Effect, and check out the Capitol Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.